My name is Daniel Carter. I am 34 years old, and for most of my adult life, I lived with the knowledge that my own father had erased me from his world before I even had the chance to become someone. Growing up in a strict middle-class family in suburban Illinois, I was raised to believe that obedience mattered more than happiness, that reputation was more important than dreams, and that success only counted if it followed the path my father had designed. He was a respected accountant in our town, known for his discipline and control, and from the time I was a child, he planned my future without ever asking what I wanted, expecting me to join his firm, inherit his clients, and maintain his legacy. But everything changed when I earned a scholarship to study graphic design and digital media at a university in California. Because for the first time in my life, I saw a future that belonged to me, not to him. And when I told him about my decision at the dinner table during my sophomore year, his face hardened in a way I had never seen before. His fork froze midair. His jaw tightened, and in a calm but deadly voice, he said that artists were failures, that creativity was for people who couldn't handle real work, and that if I walked away from accounting, I would be walking away from his support forever. I tried to explain that this wasn't rebellion, it was purpose. That I had found something I was passionate about, something I was good at, but he didn't listen. He stood up, pushed his chair back, and declared in front of my mother and younger brother that I was no longer welcome in his house if I chose that useless degree. And that night, I packed my bags with shaking hands, left behind childhood trophies, photo albums, and a family that had decided I was disposable. Boarding a bus to California with less than $400 in my wallet and a heart full of fear and determination, not knowing that this painful exile would one day become the foundation of my greatest strength. Arriving in California felt like stepping into another world, one where nobody knew my name, my history, or the shame my father had wrapped around me. And at first, that freedom was terrifying, because without family support, every mistake felt fatal. I rented the smallest room I could find in a crowded apartment near campus, sharing a kitchen with 4 strangers, sleeping on a mattress placed directly on the floor, and surviving mostly on instant noodles and campus cafeteria leftovers. Working late-night shifts at a print shop to pay rent, tuition gaps, and bus passes, often finishing work at 2 in the morning and returning to class barely awake, yet despite exhaustion, I felt more alive than I ever had, because every project I completed, every design I created, every professor who praised my work reminded me that I was not useless, that my dreams had value, and slowly opportunities began appearing in quiet ways. A freelance poster here, a logo design there, a small social media campaign for a local cafe, each one building my confidence brick by brick. While back home, my father never called, never asked if I was eating properly, never checked if I was safe, and my mother's occasional messages were careful and restrained, as if loving me too openly would anger him. And for years, I lived with the silent pain of knowing that my success meant nothing to the man whose approval I had spent my childhood chasing. Yet instead of letting that rejection destroy me, I turned it into fuel, studying late into the night, mastering software programs, networking with classmates, attending free workshops, and absorbing everything I could about branding, marketing, and digital storytelling. Until by the time I graduated, I had built a strong enough portfolio to land an internship at a fast-growing tech startup in San Francisco, marking the first real proof that walking away from my father's shadow had not been a mistake, but the beginning of my own legacy. Working at the startup changed my life faster than I ever expected, because what began as a temporary internship soon turned into a full-time position when my designs helped launch a mobile app that unexpectedly went viral, bringing in millions of users within months. And suddenly, I was no longer the struggling student counting every dollar, but a valued creative director whose ideas influenced branding campaigns, investor presentations, and product identity. Earning respect in boardrooms where nobody cared about my past or my father's opinion, and with financial stability came emotional clarity. I moved into a small but modern apartment overlooking the bay, bought my first reliable car, and finally allowed myself small luxuries like weekend trips and decent furniture. Yet despite outward success, a quiet emptiness followed me everywhere, because achievements feel incomplete when there is no one to share them with. And every time I saw fathers proudly attending their children's graduations or weddings, a dull ache reminded me of what I had lost. Meanwhile, back in Illinois, life had taken a different turn for my father. Although I didn't know it at the time, his accounting firm was slowly declining due to outdated practices, younger competitors, and poor investment decisions, while his rigid pride prevented him from adapting, and when his longtime partner retired and several major clients left. His financial foundation began cracking silently, just as mine was rising, and fate, with its cruel sense of timing, was slowly preparing the moment when our paths would cross again, not as father and son, but as two men standing on opposite sides of success and failure. The message arrived on an ordinary Wednesday afternoon while I was reviewing a campaign proposal in my office, and at first, I almost ignored it because the number was unfamiliar and the tone was formal. But the moment I read the name at the bottom, my hands froze. "This is Michael Carter, your father," followed by a short request asking if we could talk about an urgent legal matter. And in that instant, 10 years of silence collapsed into a single breath, memories of being thrown out, ignored, and forgotten resurfacing with painful clarity. Yet instead of anger, I felt confusion, because my father had never been the type to ask for help, and certainly not from the son he had disowned. So after hours of hesitation, I finally agreed to meet him at a small cafe near his old office. And when I walked in and saw him sitting alone at a corner table, thinner, grayer, and visibly tired, I barely recognized the man who once dominated every room with authority. His shoulders were slumped, his suit outdated, and his eyes avoided mine as if ashamed. And after awkward small talk, he finally confessed that his firm was facing bankruptcy, that several lawsuits and unpaid loans had placed him on the edge of losing everything, including his home, retirement savings, and professional license, and that the only way to restructure his business and protect remaining assets was through a legal settlement that required my signature as a co-owner of a trust he had secretly established years ago in my name, a trust he had created for family security, but never told me about after cutting me off. And now, without my approval, the courts would freeze all accounts and seize his remaining assets, leaving him ruined. And as he spoke, I listened quietly, realizing that the man who once believed I was worthless now needed my permission to survive. And in that moment, I was given a power I had never asked for, a power that could heal or destroy, depending on what kind of person I chose to be. For several days after meeting my father, I barely slept, replaying our conversation again and again in my mind, weighing years of rejection against the fragile man I had seen sitting across from me, realizing that revenge would be easy. All I had to do was refuse to sign and walk away, leaving him to face the consequences of his pride alone, just as he had once left me. Yet something inside me resisted that simplicity. Because pain passed down through generations only grows stronger if someone does not choose to stop it. And when I finally agreed to review the documents with my lawyer, I discovered that the trust he had created years earlier had been intended to support my education and future, but had been frozen when he cut ties with me, revealing that even in his harshness, there had been hidden concern he never knew how to express. And this discovery softened my anger, allowing space for understanding. So when we met again in a quiet law office, I signed the papers slowly, deliberately, not as an act of surrender, but as a conscious choice to rise above resentment. And in return, I requested only transparency, honesty, and respect moving forward, conditions he accepted without hesitation, his voice trembling as he apologized for letting fear and pride cost him his son. And for the first time in my life, I saw him not as an authority figure, but as a flawed human being trying to rebuild what he had broken. And over the following months, his business stabilized under professional management. He sold his house and downsized, learned to live modestly, and gradually began rebuilding trust through consistent effort rather than empty words. While I learned that forgiveness does not erase the past, but it frees the future. And today, when we meet for dinner or walk along the lake near his new apartment, our conversations are honest, imperfect, and real, no longer built on expectations or control, but on mutual respect. And I have come to understand that being disowned taught me independence, being ignored taught me resilience, and being needed taught me compassion, proving that sometimes The hardest beginnings lead to the strongest endings.